After adding dates to our app in the previous lecture, and in particular to the movements, we now have a huge bug in our app when we sort the movements in the user interface. And so let's now go ahead and fix that bug. Now, before getting to work, I just need to mention that I actually recorded this video after finishing this entire project. And so the code that you see here will be slightly different than what you have at this point. So for example, you're not going to have these two lines here yet in the display movements function, but that's not a big deal. You'll just have to keep that in mind as you progress through this section. All right. But anyway, let me now show you the bug, which is this. So as we click here on sort, these movements do indeed get sorted correctly. But watch what happens here to these dates. So the movement dates, as they're called. As you see, they stay in place. Now they move around here a little bit because these parts here correctly change. But this August 1st here, for example, will always stay here in the beginning, no matter what the value there is. So you see it's still the same date, but now with this different movement value. Now this happens because all we're doing here when we're sorting is to just sort the movements array, but not the dates, right? So here we are simply using the dates from the account object simply at the current index, but with no regard of sorting the movements. And so this is what we need to fix. So we need to basically sort these two at the same time. Now, I said in the previous lecture that in the real world, we would probably have an object for the movements, for example, containing the value of the movement, the date, and some other properties about this movement. And so let's now actually create an object like this here, basically combining movement and date, so that we can then sort them both together. That's going to be the easiest way of doing this. We could also combine them into a nested array, but I think this way it's going to be a bit more explicit and easier to understand. Now, before we do that, let's actually also make sure, so you need to make sure that when you call this display movement, you actually pass in the entire account, because there was also some error about that earlier. So let me find that for you. Yeah, right here. So in display movements, you should not pass in the current account dot movements, but really the entire account. All right, so that's very important. And yeah, so here is the function. And so here, let's now create that combined movements with dates. So basically an array of objects where each of them contains the movement and the date, instead of having them like we have right now in a separate array for movements and one for the dates. So this doesn't make so much sense, but again, I'm not going to change the entire application architecture now. And so I'm just going to do that right here as we display the movements. So basically just temporarily, so that we can then easier sort them together. So let's call these here very explicitly combined movements and dates. And so here we just going to go over account.movements, and we want an array of the same length as the movements. So let's use a map here. And then in there, each of them is going to be called a movement. They actually also need the index. So we need parentheses here. So the index. And then here I want to return an object. And so we cannot just do this, but we actually need to wrap this into parentheses. Not sure if we ever did this earlier. We could also just create a function body like this and then return the object with whatever we want in here. So this would be the same as specifying parentheses here and then the object that we want to return. So here we want to return the current movement and then also the date. So let's specify a date property. And then this one is going to come from account. So the account that we're currently passing into this function, and then dot movement dates at the current index position. So let's use at and then y. All right. So again, here we are not doing the sorting yet. All we're doing is to create a new data structure in which we can then easily sort these two together. So let's log it to the console just to check it out. So let's find that here. And yeah, it has the same length. So it's again 8 for 8 movements. But now here it is called mov. Well, let's call this maybe movement. So movement, and then that's going to be the value of mov, because remember that this array here is just an array of these values. So checking this out again. So the movement is the value, and then we have the corresponding date. Nice. And so now we can just sort this object by the value here, and then the date will of course be sorted as well in the same order. All right. So now we're going to replace this part right here. For now, let's just comment this out, because of course we still need to make use of this sort property right here. But now we're going to do it in a different way. So here what we did was, if sort was true, then we would sort these movements here, and if not, then this value would just become the movements without the sorting. But now let's do it a bit differently. So now we already have the default, which is this one, and then all we do is to say if sort, and more like this. So if we should sort, then here we simply apply the sort to this array. Dot sort. And so this will then actually mutate the original array, which is not a problem in this case. But as you already know, if we don't want that, then we can use the toSorted method as well. But here, actually, this is exactly what we want. And so we're just going to take this array and sort it if sort is set to true. And if not, well, then it is simply this array right here that will be rendered in the next step. So let's get rid of this one right here and specify our sorter function. And so while earlier we had a minus b, because we already had the values here, because we were already sorting the movements array, now we need to, of course, grab that. So that's a dot movement minus b dot movement, because we still want to sort by those values. All right, so now, of course, movs is no longer defined. And so let's fix that here in the next step. So we have now our data structures. We have it sorted if we want it. And now it is this data structure that we will actually loop over. So combined movement dates. And now we need to adapt this code here a little bit, of course. So here, instead of the movement, we get now an object. So let's call that object actually. And then here we can just destructure that. So we need to use the exact same name as the property names. So movement and date. And so this will then create these two variables out of object. And we could actually do this destructuring right here in this place, but let's keep it a bit more explicit by doing it like this. Now here we're creating a conflict with this variable right here. And so maybe let's call this here movement date. Okay, and then here we do the same. Movement date. And with this, we're fine. Now we just need to change the things here. So here we had mov before. So this is now called movement. Here we now have the actual date. So this was actually where the bug was coming from. And so now we will no longer read the date from the original array, but we will get it from the data structure that we just built. So that's then exactly that movement date right there. And then I believe that these two lines you will not have yet. And so again, as you go through the rest of the section, make sure that you use the correct values here. So this mov does no longer exist. So it will again be movement. And here I think everything is correct. So the date and the locale, and also down here. So let's try to reload this. So we have no more bugs. And now let's check if this actually works. So for example, here this biggest value is on April 1st. So let's see what happens. And yeah, so now the date stayed together with the value. So let's unsort it. Let's just check another one. So this 642 is on May 8th. So let's sort and let's see if the date stays with it. So where is it? There, and nice. So with this, we fixed our bug. And we did so by always keeping the date together with the movement value itself, simply by creating this combined data structure right here. So let's just get rid of this. And yeah, I think now you're ready to move on to the next lecture. Again, just keep in mind that you will have to use this movement here instead of what I'm going to type in that video. In that video, I will just type out this, but that is now wrong. It needs to be movement now in order to work.